I would say my penny dropping moment when I joined Hoxton was relatively early on. The way that I saw kind of Chris move, and he was managing to get another 2 days out of 1 day that I was managing to do.
At what point, though, is it right to delegate, would you say?
I think the way that I run my business is I'm a very logical individual in the sense that there has to be a blueprint to the way that I run my business. We sit down, we go through every single client almost as a line item basis, and then actually understanding what do they need, what needs to be done, and actually where is a value proposition that can be delivered. Your ability to learn, you don't need to learn every single lesson yourself. And that's the painful way of doing so. Where is this bus going? Is it aligned with what it is that I'm doing? And if you're on a growth journey and you want to continue to grow your business, well then I personally think, there's no better place.
Thanks for joining us today on the Hoxton Life podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
I'm very well, very well. It's great to have you here. Somebody who's spent so long within the offshore financial planning space, or what I like to call the international financial planning space. It's not offshore, it's not an oil rig, is it?
No, far from it, actually.
So getting someone like yourself with such vast experience, you worked from BDM all the way up to running your own brokerage.
Yeah, correct.
Before eventually joining Hoxton. So what I really would love to do at this point is just kind of take me back in time to when you were running your brokerage, okay, and you then decided to join Hoxton. How long ago was that, and then why?
So I guess first and foremost, I wasn't running my own brokerage. I was kind of appointed as kind of one of the lead partners for our biggest office as a brokerage. So the kind of my general kind of as a high level overview in terms of the journey was BDM, stepped up to become an advisor became area manager, and then kind of grew within that particular role up until a point in time where I was kind of headhunted to come and run one of the offices for one of the bigger brokerages at that point in time.
Yep.
So that was something that we were very much in the DB transfer space. We were traveling a lot at that particular point in time. Business was going fantastically well. We then, the business was continuing to grow at that point in time as well. So then what we naturally did was, as that was growing, the industry changed, regulation continued to change because, as everyone will know, that in the international space, regulation has become tighter, very similar to the UK. In actual fact, it's become more stringent. So as that's kind of become more apparent, businesses naturally come under certain pressure. And the way that I always describe the business is, a large majority of the international advisory groups, you reference kind of oil rigs. I always kind of described them as kind of oil giants because they were built on $100 barrels. But then what naturally happened was the industry kind of turned into you're only making $60 barrels, right? And the way that I always kind of describe Hoxton, we were actually born out of a very lean era. So there wasn't, in terms of the margins that existed in other places at that point in time weren't necessarily apparent. So me and 3 other partners at that point in time, so all of which still actually very much work with me. So Kareem, Nabil, Zahir, so all of these guys, the firm that we were at, we decided actually we didn't necessarily see eye to eye with, shall I say, the oil giant. I won't reference any names. And we decided actually, well, I think it's best place for it in order for us to go do something different and go work under a different banner. And at that point in time, we started to kind of really explore the options. Do we go down the route of setting up our own company? Do we go down the AR route? Do we just go work for somebody? And I think we approached the business slightly differently at that point in time. So as opposed to speaking to all the guys that ran all of these businesses, and the way that I see it, they're all going to tell you exactly the same thing, right? We're the best thing since sliced bread, our firm does this, blah, blah, blah. And the way that I kind of saw it was, okay, well, why don't we know exactly what business that we're doing as a group of advisors. So let's go speak to the institutions. So we went to the institutions and we were like, who's placing the most amount of business with you guys? Who do you like the way that their infrastructure is set up, their licensing capabilities? And Chris and Hoxton had come up on a number of occasions. So Nabil had kind of set out the original kind of first steps of the journey. So we sat down with these guys, and what we had kind of agreed was actually we didn't really have an interest in working too much for Hoxton. We liked the name of it, but we had a fully functioning business in ourselves. So we had BDM capabilities, we had administrative capabilities. We were falling short on the compliance side, but that's where we would lean on a business. And we set up kind of much more of an AR business. So we had a completely separate office set up in Dubai. We had our own BDMs, we had our own kind of advisors, and we just kind of grew that side of the business out. And that's where, we were doing great and Chris was doing great at exactly the same time. But I think it came to a realization, which is, I don't really enjoy running the business, but I love what it is that I do. And me and Kareem and a lot of the other guys were kind of very much in exactly the same position, which is actually, this is good fun. Business is going really well, but you try and drag me into a room and speak to me about compliance for 3 hours. The reality is you'll probably lose me about three minutes into it. And everyone will know that. And not to say that I don't have an interest. I have an interest where I need to have an interest, but actually at a very macro level and trying to navigate the complexities of being an international advisor in multiple different jurisdictions is no easy feat, right?
That's a really great point, right? A couple of things came up there. One is like, if you're going to do your due diligence on a firm, go and speak to product providers. They'll tell you who are crap and who are good, right? So that's a really good tip anyway for somebody who's thinking about leaving a firm, joining another one. Speak to product providers, speak to some of those investment companies. They'll tell you who's doing well and who's not, right? That's a really, really good point. The other one is the hats, the multiple hats that you're wearing when you're running a business. Whether you're self-employed, you're an RI, you're an AR, there is a level of responsibility you have outside of what you truly love, right? And it sounds to me you're somebody that truly loves the client journey. You love interacting with clients, right? You love winning new clients, bringing them on. But when it comes to things like compliance, it doesn't mean that you don't care about it. It's just, do you need to wear that hat? Is there a level of detail that you need to go into? Or can you pass it to somebody else who's more qualified and experienced to be able to do that on your behalf, right?
Yeah, exactly that. I think is any journey of running a successful advisory group, and I feel like I'm quite fortunate because I've seen it from various different sides. I've seen it purely as an advisor. I've seen it purely as a BDM. I've seen it as a manager. I've seen it as a shareholder. I've seen it as a partner. And then you come to realize, actually, trying to do this in this space at this moment in time at the level that we're aiming to do it in, that takes a considerable level of resources and expertise, and you need to go out and find the right professionals to do that for you, and trying to manage those professionals. And I think the difference is I look at Chris and the way that Chris does it. Chris really wants to do this. He loves the running of the business side of it. And I've worked with guys that run successful businesses, but I wouldn't say that they love running successful businesses. They know how to do it, but it's not what gets them out of bed every morning. I would say, I think you and I would both agree, I think it's a very different set of circumstances when it comes to Chris and, in terms of what we're building right now.
Yeah, huge, definitely. Talk to me about, so obviously you were partners in the brokerage, you're building the business out. You then, about 5 years ago, decided to come across to Hoxton. The transition from where you were, you'd done your due diligence, you'd worked out where you wanted to go and why. Chris was on the same trajectory as you, you understood what they were doing, and you thought that was a home for me. But at that point, you weren't really willing to kind of fully come across to Hoxton then at that point. You were looking at it from an AR perspective, were you?
Yeah. I think we were looking at it from an AR perspective, but we were doing really, our kind of collective, let's say there's kind of 4 advisors collectively, we were doing really well for ourselves, and we had kind of an infrastructure that we were very comfortable with. So we didn't feel the requirement or the need to go work for anybody else. It was, okay, well, we're doing it here. We don't feel like we're seeing eye to eye with the individuals that run the business. So, okay, naturally, as business relationships go, you have a great time. It does really well. You don't necessarily see eye to eye, and then you decide to move on. So it was time to move on. And then it was, okay, well, what's the timeline of establishing a business, going out and getting it licensed, and, doing that whole process of deciding, okay, well, let's say our collective 4 business, financial advisory group. And that's actually a very long-winded exercise in itself, and even more long-winded today than it was back then. And so we realized, actually, well, that's not something that we were particularly interested in terms of kind of paper, pen, and starting from scratch. So the AR route was the most sensible route to go down. And we were very comfortable with the AR route, which was, okay, well, we can run our own business. We were kind of, you use the term intrapreneurial. We were kind of running that kind of model anyway, because We didn't need to be told when to get out of bed and what our clients needed. We were doing that on a day-to-day basis. And we knew exactly what was required from an activity perspective in order for us to see X, in order for us to, in terms of the revenue targets or the revenue ambitions that we had as a group of advisors, we were all very much on track with that. So the AR mold actually fitted very well.
Yeah.
But then that just kind of, so whilst we had that, and then, what Chris was doing at exactly the same time, was just as well, even more impressive than what we thought we were doing. So we were like, actually, well, we kind of sat down, all of us kind of collectively sat down, and it was, okay, well, we're all going to the same destination, but we've just kind of split it up in a various number of cars. Are we all on the same mission? Are we happy to immerse ourselves? And what does that look like? So the way that I see it, it was almost kind of like, big slice, small pie, or small slice, big pie. And, I was much more comfortable with the small slice, big pie scenario because it meant that there was more professionals running the relevant departments that I needed to run those departments. And it was less conversations. And it wasn't necessarily less conversations. It was more related to, it allowed me more time and every one of the guys to focus on what we were best at. And I think that's what exactly the message was. It was, okay, well, what can we do on a day-to-day basis that allows us to deliver the best version of ourselves in the bit that we enjoy the most?
And what was that bit?
That was very much the advisory side of the business. The advisory side of the business, the face-to-face side of the business, that's the bit that I enjoy the most. I've done, I would say, even managing floors and managing advisors, it was, we did well at it. I wouldn't say I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay, great. That's perfect. So let's look at this AR model, because like in the UK, right, an AR would say sit underneath a network, right?
Yeah.
Now, you're still wearing multiple hats when you are an AR. It's technically running your own business. Like you said, no one was telling you to get out of bed at a certain time or anything. So you're still wearing multiple hats to get that business running, yeah? So what were those things that you were having to do that you thought this is way harder or more time consuming? I mean, not so much harder. You're more than capable of doing it.
Yeah.
But like, what were the things that you identified that were really starting to go, Jesus Christ, this is way more than I thought in respect of my time. Now I'm limited on the time that I'm actually putting myself in front of clients and doing the bit I enjoy. So what were those kind of pillars of those areas?
I think one of the biggest ones for us was probably recruitment. And recruitment being largely because of the fact that from a recruitment perspective, is when we were structured as a silo and we were a group of individual, naturally you want, young, smart, hungry, motivated individuals. Now, those individuals are naturally going to be inclined to bigger titles and bigger companies. So trying to convince those individuals to come and sit with you and 4 guys in a room and about all of your ambitions and all of your dreams is significantly harder than doing it when you've got a fantastic office and you've got all of this. We're in a box kind of serviced office with a pokey little meeting room, trying to convince this young motivated guy who's just moved over to the Middle East that we're going to change his life. And genuinely, I said it with conviction because I believe that was always going to be the case. But actually, there's a much more compelling argument when you walk into a bigger office. And so I think the flip side of that is rather than us feeling as though we need to really convince this individual to join us, whereas now the shoe's firmly on the other foot, and naturally as it is with bigger businesses that are successful, it's those individuals that are wanting to join you, and therefore you can focus on getting better talent through the door, getting them through the door in a faster fashion, but actually putting them into a framework that is much more constructive in order for them to become better and more efficient quicker. So, rather than all of a sudden, the reality is if I need to train one particular individual and I've got 5 client back-to-back meetings the following day, I naturally, of course, I still has to I will prioritize my client side of the business more because that's the most important and the most valuable, asset that I've got at this moment in time. So then me deciding, okay, well, let me try and train up this individual for 6 hours of the day, and I'm still not convinced that he's the guy. He or she, in actual fact, in reality.
You could start to get quite resentful.
Yeah, I think probably not resentful, but more frustrated in the sense that you have to, you're trying to be significantly more selective, but you don't have the talent pool to be selective from.
Yep.
I think that's kind of the difficulty.
So it goes back to, let's just kind of, you mentioned intrapreneur a second ago. It's one of my favorite words at the moment, intrapreneur up against entrepreneur. You're clearly an entrepreneurial individual and you had the drive to want to build something, right, on your own.
Yeah.
I've had that. I've been there, 16 years of building a recruitment business. I had that drive of wanting to do it on my own, right? I still kind of do my financial plan of life. I don't think it's ever going to go away. However, the other term is intrapreneur. Can you be entrepreneurial inside a business?
I think you have to be. In order to be successful, you have to be. I think the way that I run my business is, making sure that my business is not reliant on any one particular individual or any way, shape, or form that, I need somebody to give me X or I need to be provided with Y. I don't run my business on that particular basis. Is if I feel like my back's against the wall, it's me kind of in a meeting room, kind of buckling down and deciding, okay, well, how do we turn a corner on this particular kind of hurdle that we faced? And I think you naturally have to be that way inclined, and you will, of course, and if you are entrepreneurial, you're going to want to have the right guys around you and the right individuals, the right, team members around you that actually allow you to do your job successfully. That's the way that I'd kind of see it. But then the way that I see it is, the way that I'm running my business, or even, the book that I manage, it's a small advisory group in itself, right? We speak to advisory groups on a day-to-day basis. We know how much they manage. We know which ones that we've, in terms of, gone out and built into our business over the last year or so. Trying to do that, as you'll know, that's a full-time business, trying to manage that book of clients. Now, actually, the ancillaries around that, i.e., your compliance, the recruitment, all of these particular parameters, that's another job in itself. And trying to do both, I think, is a very difficult task. I don't think it's an impossible task. It's too difficult for me to do, if I'm being honest.
No, I get it. If you want to go far, what do they say? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed from running my own business is I used to often wish I had the people around me that I could turn to that were experts within specific areas of running a business, right? Finance was never one of my brilliances. I kind of handed that off to somebody else within my business. And I wish I, and I didn't, and he wasn't very good, to be honest with you. Yeah. So it's the blind leading the blind. Coming into somewhere like Hoxton, where I can literally go, Charlie, who's an absolute finance whiz, and I can get an answer instantly. I've learned so much within a short period of time that's improved my skills, even around things like budgeting and growing my department. My department's got a huge budget, and I'm responsible for a massive budget. But I've lent into the finance team to help me to manage that budget and be realistic. And one of the things that Charlie said to me is like, I'm not here to stop you from developing your department, right? We want people that are entrepreneurial, who want to grow with us and got growth mindset. I'm here to make it happen within the restrictions of what we can and what we can't do. So let's make it work. And I love that. Whereas before, you can get carried away with your ideas, can't you? We're going to do this, we're going to do that. They actually welcome those ideas, I found, at Hoxton, and they help you achieve that by putting in a proper plan around the areas that maybe I'm weak on.
I think with, as with this business, there is a fundamental blueprint, in terms of the way that it's structured. And I think that extends out to every single role and position within this business. There's a blueprint to the way that I run my business. There's a blueprint to the way that my team run their businesses. It's something that we ultimately pride ourselves on quite aggressively, because the reason I sit in meetings with so much confidence, it's not because I feel that I know everything that there is to know. By no means. It's much more related to, I don't believe that there's a single question that could be put in front of me in the universe that I have discussions in that I can't lean on one individual in our particular business, or that we could pick up the phone and make a call to somebody that would have the answer to that at an incredibly high level. Okay.
So you came into 5 years ago, you came into Hoxton, you came in with the impression that you were going to run your own practice. Yeah. Standalone, and then bolt in. So you made the decision then to go, well, actually, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to come fully underneath Hoxton.
Yeah.
What was the turning point? What made you actually do that?
So it was more, I think it was related to, so the AR relationship started with, it was kind of handshakes, kind of some formal agreements, but nothing to extent. But it had gone on for a period long enough that it really needed to be formalized. So we'd kind of sat down and it was time to formalize it as, okay, well, you're going to be responsible for this department in your AR business. You're going to be responsible. And me, Kareem and Nabil are looking at each other at that moment in time and saying, is this even worth it? In terms of the revenue or the end result isn't too dissimilar to what would happen on both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it was more so related to the fact that we were so aligned with what was taking place in Hoxton and what we were doing. We were pretty much, and in the world of financial advice and financial services, there's so many different facets to the business, and there's so many different avenues that you can choose to go down. But the avenue that Hoxton was going down was the exact same avenue that we were. So we were very aligned in the nature of the business, the type of business, and the discussions that we were having, or where resources were being deployed. So with that being said, it was kind of a natural alignment, in my personal opinion. I think it was just kind of a huge element of trust and respect. Is okay, well, you guys are doing that. And that's where we were I think that's something that we kind of struggled with, because we naturally trusted and respected ourselves, hence the reason we chose to do business. We'd kind of had various different encounters over that particular journey. So it was like, okay, well, there's been a long enough time frame. We're doing our thing. These guys are doing their own thing. Trust and respect them the way that they're running their business. So that was kind of Matt and Chris at that point in time. It was like, okay, yeah, cool. This is starting to make a lot more sense. And at the same time, it's actually, well, we have the opportunity to deliver a far better solution for clients if we're actually all joined.
Okay, cool. Good. That's good. So you're at a point, right? One is like, keep control. It's my business. I'm going to keep control, and I'll just plug into you, and I'll do it my way. And then there's no, I'm going to immerse myself actually in the Hoxton environment. This is where the intrapreneurial side comes in, right?
Yeah.
You kind of make that transition over. I can imagine you'd come to a decision. It was the right decision. So you'd almost tried before you buy, right? Yeah. By being in it, and you experienced it, you saw it, you were able to go, right, that's exactly aligned to what we want. So it makes more sense that we now come into Hoxton. You're not, and this is what I want people to understand, is that you weren't letting go of your practice, your business, right? You were just bringing it into Hoxton, into alignment. So for people who are listening to this, who like building teams, because you need to build teams to be able to get more assets under management, etc., because you can't do it all on your own, right? Did it impact you in any way? Did it, were you worried?
In actual fact, no. It actually made life a lot easier.
Right.
And the reason it made life easier was because it allowed us to focus on the bit that was important and the bit that we enjoyed, and actually where the margins really matter. And actually the pieces that we weren't focused on, or we weren't kind of naturally fixated on, they were kind of, it was, for us, I think all three of us would confirm, it was a bit of a sigh of relief. It was, okay, well, we don't need to try and figure this Rubik's Cube out on the fact that, the client is sat in this jurisdiction and we're sat in this jurisdiction and he's about to move to a third. I don't need to figure that bit out. Whereas I've got now somebody that's got the resource, and we're now kind of completely partnered up with somebody that, essentially we've got significant resources that are being deployed to answer those questions for us. So I think for us, I don't think it was a particularly difficult decision. I think it made life easier, and it allowed us, our growth trajectory to actually improve quite significantly, because I think as we came through the door, we actually recruited, so all three of us managed to recruit, around our teams quite well. So therefore, we were just kind of, it was, okay, well, this is the only task that we need to do. And that's the bit that we knew best, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that was the bit that we knew back to front, and we knew that we could run a business, but it wasn't something that we had historically been doing. Yeah. So, and then when you come to realize is, okay, well, it's not something that I've been doing, and it was like, well, I know why I didn't do that. If I'm being honest, I know why I wasn't running a business in the offshore, in the international space, is because it wasn't. I think the client focus is, like I said, is I'm best served is doing what I believe I'm best at. And my natural personality is inclined to start to get frustrated when I'm doing stuff that I don't like to do. And I think everyone in the business could probably vouch for that.
Yeah. So as your ambition grows, right, and you're a very ambitious individual, right, at your early stages of your career still, you're ambitious, you want to push forward. Have you noticed because you've been here for 5 years, being on the mothership, if we call it the mothership, or Chris likes to call it the bus, right?
Yeah.
The Hoxton bus. Has it gotten better? Has it gotten more efficient? Has it gotten faster? Is it improving? And as a byproduct of that, do you improve?
Yeah, I think Hoxton is a very different animal today than what it was 5 years ago. Naturally, of course, and the way that I actually explained it to clients is I feel like, naturally when a business is growing, it's very much centered around okay, well, we think you can do this job, why don't you do that job? And we think you could do this job. But now I feel like what you're seeing at this present point in time is a lot of the right chess pieces in the right places, and actually the compounding effect of those. So rather than, we had a conversation about, managers in this particular industry, and naturally I think the industry has a natural kind of course of action okay, well, this individual is the best, advisor or from a revenue perspective or whatever it may be. Okay, well, he's naturally going to be the greatest manager.
Yeah.
And I think, and I think that's something that, typically tends to fall short, not necessarily just for this industry, but most industries in actual fact. So I think the difference is we've got a lot of the right players in the right places. And, from the point where everyone seems to be doing a fantastic job. So what to address your question, directly is, are we different to where we were 5 years ago, and are we more efficient? Like, significantly so. I think what we're able to do today versus what we're able to do 3, 4, 5 years ago is, in terms of the timelines have just reduced astronomically.
And also, there's a byproduct, isn't it? As the Hoxton as a whole grows and becomes more established and more well known, the more money they pump into things like branding, marketing, recruitment. It could be in-house training and development, our fantastic Pathway program where they're training some brilliant business developers.
Yeah.
Ultimately, when it's your own business, you've got to think also about training, development, brand, marketing, AI technology. I mean, it is overwhelming, right? To think, shit, how am I going to keep up with all of this and run my business? So it makes sense to hand that over to the business whilst you focus on exactly what it is that you're actually doing.
I think it's relevant to what do you enjoy and what's really important to you, right? In terms of what part of the day-to-day in terms of running a practice do you enjoy the most, and where do you believe that your skill sets and your resources are best spent? In terms of no different to the way everyone would typically how a successful business, where do I get the best return on my investment?
Yeah.
Do I get the best return on my investment spending 4 hours a day talking about recruitment when I'm not a recruitment advisor?
Yeah.
And I don't actually so the individuals that I'm going up against that are actually recruitment. There's a recruitment team. They have these conversations. I'm having the most watered down version of that particular conversation that I've decided, I've pulled my resources in and decided, okay, well, I need to get serious about recruiting a paraplanner. All of a sudden, well, how do I do that? What do I jump on Indeed.com and see what paraplanners are being offered and decide what I can afford to do? It's those pieces there that I think are quite integral to growing the business. And I think fortunately it's worked remarkably well for me because it's allowed me to focus on what it is that I'm responsible for and what it is that I enjoy doing. But then at the same time, I do have a very keen interest as to the way that the business is being run and how it's being run and why decisions are being made and the way that the directions are moving. And, that's something that I've got a very keen interest in. And I think that's just more the entrepreneurial side of the way that my mind works.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's Chris's head in sometimes because I kind of like to know the ins and outs and everything. But it's because I've been in that place. So understanding what they're doing over here could impact me. Understanding what they're doing over there could impact me and what I'm trying to do for everybody as a whole.
Yeah.
So I like to understand the bigger picture. I think that's like being in a position where you haven't, some people just do their job, right? And they're siloed almost.
Yeah,
Whereas
and I
when,
think,
when you've been exposed to it, it's very difficult to not go back.
I think if you go to the first presentation on our conference in January, that was quite I found it incredibly interesting in order to introduce that to the business, because it's all good and well managers being sat in a room and deciding this is how we want to grow the business and this is what we want to do, but it's integral for every single person in the industry and not necessarily not the industry, in the company, to know, okay, well, what is this? Where is this bus going?
Yeah.
Where is this bus going? Is it aligned with what it is that I'm doing? And if you're on a growth journey and you want to continue to grow your business, well, then I personally think, there's no better place.
Yeah.
And then actually, even if it's a housing exercise, there's plenty of, we've got plenty of guys in the business as well that just use it as a housing exercise.
What do you mean by housing exercise?
Housing exercise is, okay, well, you're not really growing your business. You don't have a huge interest in growing your business, but you manage a sizable book enough in order for you to just know that it's being managed under the right framework, in the correct fashion.
Great. You're obviously a very good leader because you have a really strong team and you have achieved significant assets under management within the space in the time that you've been running. How much have you got under management at the moment, if you don't mind asking?
Assets under management now is $175 million US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About 140 UK.
Yeah, just over 140 UK. And that, I'd say, that's probably been built up over the course of the last 9 years or so.
Yeah.
Last 9 years or so, kind of. So it's been a solid, and some of those years were absolutely fantastic, and then others were relatively mute. But overall, I think the aggregate is solid.
Brilliant. Give us our listeners a bit of a breakdown of your team then. So
yeah.
Who do you have in place? What are they doing and why? And has that evolved over time as well?
I invest a significant level of resources into my team. So my team is my backbone is very much Sheila. Sheila's my backbone in terms of the business. So she's my EA and an all-encompassing kind of guardian angel when it comes to financial advice.
She like that?
So, and then in terms of, and I've got two other key members of my team, which is Linda Lago, who was recently so she was very much brought into my business. So I actually took her from another department of the business. So that's quite key to, naturally, people are going to want to progress and move into different departments of the business. So she was a paraplanner on one side of the business. So I brought her in directly as a paraplanner to help manage my business. So she's fantastic in terms of everything related to my UK client book, in terms of solutions. And I feel like, there's a lot of, even as much as she's my paraplanner, the reality is there's a number of kind of discussions where with my team members, I actually ask them for advice as to what would you do and, what should we be doing in relation to this? Because I don't, at times I don't have the time to go speak to all of the institutions or understand all of the solutions. And that's kind of part and parcel of their role. Mm-hmm. And the way that I've built out the team is making sure that everyone understands the business and the mission, as opposed to thinking of it as a silo kind of task-based job. Mm-hmm. And then I've got Faraz. Faraz is very much kind of my right-hand man. He's over here. So he's, once again, as a paraplanning role in terms of, so where Linda is kind of my right hand when it comes to the UK side of the business, Faraz is very much that in terms of the international side. So, our job is, and where I'm investing all of my resources, is very much centered around the idea of improving the client proposition. That's my whole mission, and that's where all of my resources are being delivered at this present point in time.
Just elaborate on that then.
So, in reality, as I mentioned, I'm managing $175 million US, right? So at this present point in time, that's my most valuable asset by far. It's not the client that I'm going to take on tomorrow. It's not going to be the client, the one next year. Right now, everything and all of my resources are, how do I improve my client relationship moving forward? So, the mission is always to run a proactive business model as opposed to a reactive business model. I don't want to, I never want to feel that the way that I'm running my book of clients is ever in any way, shape or form that I'm on the back foot when it comes to them needing something or them requiring something. We want to kind of be very forthcoming. Is okay, well, if you're in the UK, you've got tax allowances, making sure that they're entitled to understand what they are and why they would be using those, and helping them understand those solutions. But, I guess in reality, just really structuring the business to improve the client proposition is what do anyone that's had a financial advisor is what do you want out of your financial advisor? And if I sit down and write what I would want out of my financial advisor, I'm trying to answer those questions for them, even though I don't know what their shortlist looks like.
You mentioned 65% of your clients are based in the UK, and I think it's difficult for a UK advisor, for instance, listening to this right now and understanding, well, you live in Dubai, but 65% of your clients are in the UK. How can you do that?
Yeah, I think it was two parts, right? So I've always managed a number of clients internationally, and that's kind of largely how the book of business was built. But as most individuals and most Brits that live overseas, they will naturally go home. So, of that in terms of that 65%, I would say a fair share of those individuals are repatriated individuals. So they've gone back to the UK, and now all of a sudden we're talking about international, options, but now you just go purely and you're only having domestic-sided conversations. Fortunately, the world's an incredibly small place at this present point in time. And even if you could see people face to face, the reality is they don't usually have the time to do face to face. So actually Teams and, I'm terrible when it comes to technology, but the reality is, being able to deliver the level of service, and actually the number of times that I can get back and see particular clients is usually, there's been instances where, I'm seeing my clients more times in the UK than they would be seeing their accountant or their tax advisors, anything of that nature, and even if they're in the City of London.
What type of clients are you dealing with? What's the average investable assets of them?
The idea and the concept is I've got a number of clients in the UK that a large majority of their wealth is tied up in businesses. So really helping them find solutions at very much a corporate business level.
Brilliant. So the kind of client demographic that you're dealing with, if someone's listening and thinking, over in Dubai, they're just dealing with, Mickey Mouse clients out there over in expat land. You're not. You're dealing with serious business owners.
Yeah, no, I would, I would say every single one of my clients is C-level exec and above, right?
Yeah.
And I don't, I don't do anything on a regular basis. A large majority of it, if not all of it, is very much lump sum orientated investments. And, the way that I'd always describe the business is an internal as well as an external network. So where you've got individuals that are cross-border, internally, we can get somebody to set up your will, and we can, we've got a tax desk, and, there's somebody that can help you on the property side of things. But we may not always have all the solutions. But the reality is I'm going to be able to, if you did need a tax advisor that was a specialist, let's say on Dutch taxation, we don't necessarily have that internally. But my ability to find that individual for you is going to far supersede you going on to Google and deciding, okay, well, where do I find a Dutch tax advisor that can speak English and knows my UK tax obligations as well as in the Netherlands? So it's those kind of resources that are kind of the external network. I always think is an incredibly important resource for clients as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Any penny dropping moments, aha moments since being part of Hoxton that really kind of changed how you think about your own business or helped you build a more efficient team or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say my penny dropping moment when I joined Hoxton was relatively early on, because before we had joined, in my mini universe of financial advice that I lived in, I was actually doing really well, and we were going through the motions, we were growing the business, and and we were overcoming certain hurdles and kind of getting, let's just say, metaphorical trophies. And we were doing all of that. And then we kind of started working with Chris and Matt. And then, I saw, and then the way that I saw kind of Chris move, and he was managing to get, I don't know, like another 2 days out of one day that I was managing to do. And I remember me and Kareem specifically having the conversation. I was just like, this guy's something else. I'm actually kind of getting a bit frustrated here as to how does he manage to do as much as he manages to do? And, I kind of pulled him into a room and I was like, Chris, I tip my hat to you. I was like, obviously you got 2 more kids than I have, you're doing this and you're doing that. And I was like, how do you do it? And it was kind of the 2 key tells from that. One was obviously delegation, is making sure that you are centered and you're focused on the tasks that are the most important and where you're best served, similar to the way that we were talking about the business. And then the second one is the pound and penny task relationship, which is okay, well, making sure that you're focused on the pound task, not necessarily the penny tasks. So, and with that being said, I think, in mine and Kareem's conversation, I recruited Sheila at that point in time, which I remember, delegation's always hard when you're running kind of like a mini business, because, I think the immediate, I guess, thought that goes through most individuals' mind when I have similar conversations is, okay, well, if I'm going to spend all of this money on this particular individual, how do I make sure I get 9 hours, 8 hours a day out of them? And the initial thought, and the answer to that is you probably won't to begin with. But all of a sudden now, if that resource is sat next to you and you do have hours to fill and you do have, all of a sudden, you have the ability to kind of improve your business because you're not necessarily doing the tasks that you're not best served doing. So I think one of my earliest lessons here in terms of the Hoxton framework was obviously, I think delegation was, and I think that's been key to me growing my business.
At what point, though, is it right to delegate, would you say?
I think you have to be pragmatic, and I think sometimes you almost need to treat yourself as a bit of a management consultant. I think what I've always done is always kind of look at what it is that you're doing, take a step out, and read yourself as a business. Where are you spending all of your time, and what is the return on investment in that time being spent? And I think if you treat it on that particular basis, which is take a step out, and all of a sudden, if you've lost 2 days doing administration tasks, well, it's time to delegate.
Yeah.
Because, all of a sudden you've lost 40% of your week doing something that doesn't necessarily have a return on investment. And it's not something that you're great at. Also,
it comes to a point, doesn't it? You did exactly that. You pulled Chris into a room and you from afar you were admiring, thinking like, how is he doing this?
Yeah.
And you said it almost frustrated you, but you dropped it, the ego, came humble, went into a room and just asked, right? And when you ask, you get. And sometimes a simple conversation like that is a thing that can take you to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no point having kind of star players or some great guys around you if you're not going to choose to learn the lesson off them, right?
Yep.
Leave the egos at the door, and making sure that if you're not learning from them, well, then it's a bit of an irrelevant universe.
100%. Right, let's finally finish on non-negotiables, right? People will be looking at you and thinking, wow, you've done a fantastic job, you're growing, but that's hard work, that's graft, okay? So let's say somebody's looking at you thinking, how do I do it? What are the non-negotiables when it comes to being a successful financial planner?
The non-negotiables? I think that's a bit of a difficult question, actually. I don't know. My non-negotiables when it comes to the business is not really accepting excuses that things can't be done, if that makes sense. Yep. It's really just making sure. I think my non-negotiable is always having a framework. I think the way that I run my business is I'm a very logical individual in the sense that there has to be a blueprint to the way that I run my business. So what me and my team do twice a year is we sit down and we go through every single client almost as a line item basis. I have the privilege of doing that because I don't have a huge number of clients. And then actually understanding what do they need, what needs to be done, and actually where is a value proposition that can be delivered. So we do that twice a year, and then we break out the team is, okay, well, Linda, you're responsible for this. Sheila, you're going to be doing this, and Faraz, you're going to be doing that. So the non-negotiables are very much everyone understanding their roles and knowing what it is that they need to do, and in terms of from a value enterprise perspective.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a key one for me.
Yeah, I love that. Fantastic. And anybody at any stage really in their career can actually plug into Hoxton Wealth like you did and actually get that blueprint, get that framework, because it's been tried and tested with great people like yourself that are doing so well. So for somebody who's maybe sitting on the outside, I spoke to someone recently, 90 million under management, but he's fed up, he's bored, he can't recruit the best people, he can't grow. And it's like, well, come into our ecosystem, continue to be an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneurial basis, and plug into the amazing stuff that we've got and the tried and tested frameworks that work.
Yeah.
And it's a great non-negotiable, isn't it?
And I think, and in terms of people always ask, do you need to go into the office, and in reality, I don't, but I'm an office advocate. I would much rather be in a dynamic environment and making sure that we're having conversations, because if you're in earshot of, a particular kind of client, a case study or something along those lines, your ability to learn, you don't need to learn every single lesson yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the painful way of doing so.
Yeah. Perfect. Love it. Mo, real pleasure talking to you. We're definitely going to do some more episodes with you in the future. So thank you so much for sharing your
You're very welcome.
Hoxton life. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure lots of people will probably want to reach out to you on LinkedIn, so be prepared for that.
Yeah, sure.
You never know, you might find your next superstar for your team.
Yeah, true.
Cracking. Cheers, Mo. Thank you.
Thank you very much.